Welcome to today's webinar, Navigating Change, Leadership Strategies for Managing Fleet Transformation, presented by AssetWorks. I'm Nicole Osinski, Executive Editor for Government Fleet, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. I encourage you, as always, to ask questions during the webinar at any point, and we will try to address them all. However, if we do not get to yours, don't worry, you will be contacted by email with a response after the event. Today, I'm joined by our speaker, John Compton, National Account Manager with AssetWorks. John, thank you for being here.
Great, thank you very much. So thanks everybody for joining today. My name is John Compton. I am a National Account Manager at AssetWorks. I've been here for about 6 years, and I have about 30 years of experience in the asset management industry. I have worked with organizations and solutions to help provide some best practice consulting to be able to help future leaders. And today's conversation will be a little bit more strategic in nature. We're going to be looking at leadership. We're going to be able to take a little bit of time to discuss, obviously, some new technologies, but it's really based on managing some of those new technologies today. So not only are we going to talk about successful change management, we're going to talk about embracing some new technologies. How do we get buy-in from our teams, our leadership? We're going to talk a little bit about increasing collaboration with other departments. Teams and communication are a big aspect of leadership, and we're really going to break some of that down. In terms of being able to contribute today, please, there is a chat. You can submit some questions. We will take time at the end of the presentation to be able to answer those questions and be a little bit more collaborative if we need to be able to do that. So thank you again for joining, and we'll get started. So first of all, we're going to talk a little bit about vision and strategic thinking. There's a term out there that we use called fleet decision makers. And most of the fleet decision makers are and have been empowered by their organizations to ensure that the fleet is successful. There are a lot of things that need to be done in terms of budgeting, in terms of new technologies, in terms of making sure you hire the right individuals to be able to run that fleet. And so we're going to talk about that from a perspective of creating a clear vision and strategic thinking. When we start to go ahead and break down a little bit of the vision and strategic thinking, there's three components that we really want to chat about here. One of them is providing direction. So as a fleet decision maker, you're assigned with coming up and tasking the organization to come up with goals, key performance indicators. How do we translate those key performance indicators into actionable steps? And we want to be able to make consistent and confident decisions. Something we're going to talk about as we go through here, and a common phrase that I'll use is being able to make better strategic business decisions. We want to be able to talk about efficiency. How do we go ahead and use resources? How do we problem solve? Where do we come up with cultures for continuous improvement? How do we get that feedback from our teams and stakeholders? And then long-term planning. When we want to go ahead and take a look and create a long-term plan, it helps quite a bit to be able to understand where you are today. So you want to be able to evaluate what the current situation is. If we're going to go from point A to point B and create a straight line on that, you have to know where point A is to be able to even draw that line and create that plan. So having a vision of what's going on in the organization is key to the whole process. We do, here at AssetWorks, we do an academy every year, and we have a lot of keynote speakers that come up, and they're usually strategic visionaries from our community to be able to go ahead and talk about that. It's very common because they're a leader. They've worked themselves up from turning wrenches, as they would call it, all the way up into running these organizations from a fleet perspective at a very high level. Coming from that particular background has given them a very unique vision of all the different aspects, whether it's financial planning, whether it's creating budgets, whether it's actual scheduling. It's their vast amount of experience and exposure to the different components that allows them to be able to be visionary leaders in their organization. All right, so developing a strategy for a roadmap. So in terms of assessing current operations, as I mentioned before, that's key. What are our key performance indicators today? What are we measuring? What do we need to measure? A lot of organizations, when they start to plan for budgets, they have to be able to submit justification for that. So one of the components of that in determining key performance indicators is understanding what we really need to be able to report back to stakeholders. What we need to be able to report back to stakeholders and validate budgets comes back from setting goals. So now how do we go ahead and we set goals to achieve those key performance indicators? We want to make things measurable, attainable, and very specific for the organization to achieve. From there, we can develop that step-by-step plan. Do we have the right tools? Do we have the appropriate timeline to be able to achieve these goals? And most importantly, resources. More organizations that I talk with are having to do more with less. I know it's a common theme throughout the time, but it seems more relevant than ever today when I talk to our customer base and organizations that are managing their fleets, whether it's hiring techs, whether it's having the appropriate budget to be able to get the right tools. All of these things as a fleet decision maker need to be planned to be able to achieve those goals. So another piece of this, the continual reviewing and adjusting, it's the ability to evaluate, get feedback from a feedback loop, and be able to make changes so that you can go ahead and change the plan to accommodate when something's not working or if there's a better path that's seen. All right. So qualities for leadership and change management, one of the big things is adaptability and resilience. So when we start to talk about new ideas and adaptability, a lot of times organizations that I have seen are either paving the cow path, saying, John, we've always done it this way. How do we go ahead and we take new technologies and adopt them? And that, again, takes some vision from a leader to be able to do that. And when we start to talk about new technologies, everything from EV, saying, well, we don't really do a lot of EV. Organizations are being able to tap into all kinds of financial grants or benefits from that. When we start to talk about doing more with less, the reduced maintenance times on some EVs are helping organizations be able to do more with less. So there's a lot of different ways to start to justify, hey, we need to maybe move in a new direction and adopt some new ideas. We start looking at things like predictive analytics, mobility, different diagnostics. How do we go ahead and we adopt all these new technologies to help us do that more with less and develop that into the plan? So in terms of adoption for planning for the future, operational process is a really big piece of that. When we start to take a look at process and process automation, we're going to talk a little bit here too in terms of communication and teams. We want to be able to make sure that that communication happens on a very grand scale. When it takes a look at automated workflows, that helps with communications. It's not just how I talk or put a presentation together, but it's how do I keep everyone informed? We want to be able to utilize real-time data for decision making. It's an important process. Things move quickly. We can get that from new technologies, whether it's GPS, AVL, DVIR integrations, fuel transactions, EV information. All of that comes in, and it's all about a certain sense of data. Because if we're going to create KPIs, we're going to report to stakeholders, we need to be able to consolidate a lot of that data so that we can gather that, report on it, and make better business decisions. Now, one of the pieces here is fostering a learning curve. We start to take a look at communication and different components that will allow this cultural piece to go ahead and have participation in all the different groups. We start to look at things like regional training for our customers. We do actual regional user group conferences. We have something called, as I mentioned before, the Asset Works Academy. That is not only training, but it's actually a lot of networking associated with that. We offer tune-ups. So in other words, we have industry experts that'll come and help you do business process evaluations and be able to give you a roadmap and how you're utilizing the product to be able to go away and make a better plan to achieve some of those key performance indicators. We have a lot of support to be able to maximize that. We have 24/7 support, dedicated implementation teams. So a lot of our customers are leveraging all the different components that we have to be able to get the most out of the AssetWorks solution. All right. So communication. We've mentioned communication quite a bit. And one of the pieces that I'd really like to talk about communication is the automated process of that. If we're developing a plan as a leader, you have to manage up sometimes as well as down. When we mentioned key performance indicators, keeping stakeholders involved, somebody that I went to and asked for a budget, we have a lot of reporting, and you'll want to be able to automate some of that reporting from a managerial level. There's several different ways to do that. We have what we call an asset analytics component. That asset analytics component, the asset analytics component can be able to use business intelligence to be able to slice and dice that software. And that reporting can be automated. So not only can there be real-time access to it, but you can develop reports that are sent to key stakeholders on a regular basis so that they can go ahead and be able to review that. In terms of notifications, we talk about end users in communication too. So not only notifications when preventive maintenance is due, we want to be able to plan for scheduling. We want to be able to plan when parts are needed. So the more data that we've gathered throughout the system allows us to plan and create strategic planning, whether it's budget for parts, when parts are going to be necessary, all of it being communicated back to a lot of things that our customers work with called availability. So all of our planning goes back for availability, the reporting, making sure that things flow in an automated fashion. And all of that happens through communication. We do have what we call a centralized hub. So in other words, where data is for customers and end users and stakeholders. So all of it resides in a central repository, or what we call as a central hub for this. We bring in different integrations, whether it's from fuel, GPS, AVL, all of that needs to be put together so that you can make those reports happen. And that from those reports as a fleet decision maker, you can make those better business decisions. All right, so engaging with the stakeholders. Everybody that's a leader at some point has to justify whether that is a budget, whether that is something that needed to be purchased, something that needs to be planned, or in many cases, we have cities that say, hey, we need the fire trucks to run, we need the police cars to run. So there's critical response in terms of the availability of many of these units. And that's what these stakeholders, as a leader, one of the things that we need to be able to provide to them. So engaging with those stakeholders, not only to report that back, but to determine what those goals and key performance indicators are in the future. So one of the things is being able to get all of the data out to be able to provide for that. All right, so when we talk about decisiveness and leadership and decisiveness, timely decision making. So there's one thing we can talk about in terms of the quality of most leaders in the fleet industry is that the successful ones are decisive. When they make decisions, they go ahead and implement them. They need to be able to understand what's going on, but decisiveness is a key piece of that. The leader sets the goals. There's a risk versus reward. Not every decision is the right one, but being able to make a decision, move forward, and having the ability to pivot, that's key. And part of that is accountability. So when we run into organizations that are making those decisions, and again, sometimes they prove to be ineffective, but also being able to pivot because you understand that is something that happens. And you have to be accountable to understand when something is not necessarily going in the way that you need it to. So being able to be decisive, accountability, and the ability to pivot. We are going to then move into embracing new technologies. And when we talk about embracing new technologies, we are looking at a lot of different things. One of the things at AssetWorks that we do is we have been in business for over 40 years. We work with organizations to understand what their needs are. So many organizations, whether they have networked, whether they have found new technologies that may help their process, things like EV, telematics, mobility, predictive analytics. We work with our customers to be able to enhance the product based on what their needs are. While we certainly are a leader in what best practice solutions, all of our innovations are driven through our customer partnerships and what their feedback is to us in terms of what they need. So I think everybody probably on the call and most of my customers that we talk with have worked in some ways with telematics and being able to adopt that and the data that you get from that. It's real time. It drives processes like preventive maintenance based on mileage or hours, or even the data that you're getting back from fault codes on that for predictive maintenance or what we would call predictive analytics. How can we go ahead and embrace new technologies that potentially are changing the actual way that we drive fleet management today? When we look at predictive analytics, it's probably one of the largest components that we see today that may have the largest impact in how fleets manage their day-to-day operations. We talk about doing more with less, and preventive maintenance is a way that may be changed by that. Instead of doing it by mileage or hours, it can be done based on the fault codes and the artificial intelligence to be able to say, hey, we should do the preventive maintenance on this vehicle now, not before, and we may be able to save either preventive maintenance time, labor hours, and parts by having that be driven by data rather than by time and how the vehicle is operating. It could be the very next largest leap of technology that we have here in the fleet organizations. Fuel management, being able to manage where our fuel spend is, efficiency with that, and electrification. We start to talk about a lot of electrification where organizations today, so many of them, even in the Midwest, West, East, all regions, we're seeing in a move towards electrification, whether it's doing some studies on hybrid vehicles, even for police. We've got a great customer who did a study on the effects of using hybrids for police because they don't have idle time. So that idle time lowered non-idle time, lowered maintenance costs, and really justified the purchase of some of the hybrid vehicles. But it's those studies that leadership helps to be able to make those planning, to be able to work that into the budget and be able to make better business decisions from that. So the other thing to do that comes from your fleets or comes from in terms of planning, large versus small, cars, trucks, equipment, but really what's going on in the industry. As a fleet leader, you need to be involved in things like trade shows, networking. As I mentioned before, our academy has a lot of that, but NAFA or GFX, being able to go and see some of the different trends and technologies is great. There's a lot of great presentations there that are driven by other fleet managers. And also, obviously, there are a lot of vendors to be able to understand what technology is new as well. All right, successful planning for this. So as we start to embrace new technologies, how do we go ahead and actually implement the plan? So when we start to look at, say, EV, for example, and I'll use that as a little bit of an example because we have a lot of customers going out and not only acquiring EV vehicles, but the charging infrastructure, and also working with the utility companies to be able to provide for that infrastructure as well. It is one of the largest projects that we've seen to date. One of the biggest hurdles that they have to overcome, and this is part of planning and assessing needs, say for an EV strategy, is understanding the infrastructure that I'm getting from the power company. So if I'm going to be doing a planning in the implementation steps, and I use the EV as an example, what is the infrastructure? What does somebody like a Comet or an Excel be able to go ahead and update transformers, locations? How many locations am I going to have for charging? What is the use of those vehicles? All of those things are needed to be considered. And by putting that plan up front, then we can go ahead and start to select the right tools to be able to do the job, selecting the right fleet software, the right chargers, the right vehicles for that. All right. So developing the implementation plan. Now that I've got all the right data, I have to start to go ahead and consider a few things. Project timeline. How long is this going to take to be able to put this together? Do I have the right resources to do this? A project manager, somebody with the right experience. Many times I've taken a look for EV projects or for predictive analytics. They're usually somebody who's been interested in it and has some experience, but starts to develop it and be able to work through the project manager and becomes the expert on that. And then allocating a budget. Organizations, and again, if I use the EV example, are there grants to be associated with this? And do I need to be able to plan? How do I go ahead and write that grant and leverage our needs to be able to go ahead and finance this? If not, what's the justification when I write the budget? Running information to get that budget justification may come from your fleet software as well. How much did I spend on maintenance that may be eliminated by this new process or plan? Understanding, again, point A, where you are before I create the plan for point B, and being able to justify that. And that's what you may need to be able to get the budget and the financing for it. Preparing data and customizing software. So one of the large pieces we see when we do implementations is data migration. If it's coming from an older system and somebody's coming to AssetWorks new, they may have a lot of older data. Some of it's relevant, some of it is not. Even transforming with different modules, what information do I want to be bringing into the system? I see this a lot with GPS or somebody who's implementing an AVL. They may be getting all the fault codes. We have the ability to bring in the fault codes, but how do we want to go ahead and customize that data? Do I want to see every fault code and get an alert? Or are there priorities with some of those? So I want to be able to plan with how I might use that data. Not everything is critical. Some things may need to be looked at when the next preventive maintenance comes around. Other things may need to be addressed immediately. So how do we take that data so that we can structure that throughout the process? And that's a big part of it as well in terms of the planning is, what am I going to do with the data and what do I need? All right. So training and pilot testing on this. So when we take a look at the training, and I'm going to use the EV example and some of the pilot testing, there's not one customer or organization I've worked with that had a budget for EV to completely revolutionize their fleet with electric vehicles, nor does anybody necessarily want to. But most of the organizations that I've worked with have started small, whether even that's predictive analytics, GPS, EV, they start with a pilot program. One of the things the pilot program does is it tests what some of our assumptions might be. Did we find some of the savings in it? Did we go ahead and see what we thought we would see from a goals perspective by going ahead and doing a pilot or testing? And then it also allows us to be able to train. We can come up with some experts on that when we do the pilot program, and then they can go ahead and train others once you have the leaders in that specific field. So it's a really key process to that before we do the full implementation and continuous improvement. And then we roll it out. EV is one that sometimes is financially driven. So you need some of the data up front to prove it financially, and that rolls out. Same with GPS. Many times that's done in phases. But we want to be able to monitor and evaluate to make sure that the program is going in place. And as we do that, we can generate the reports necessary to go back and justify the budgets, to be able to go ahead and prove that we could get more grant money, perhaps. And then we become a full rollout and benefiting from all of the improvements that came in place with this particular plan. So it's a really key step to be able to phase much of this out. All right, overcoming resistance through effective communication. Communication is really a key piece. I know I mentioned that before, but I think one of the pieces is to communicate success. If we've asked for a lot of customer buy-in, we want to be able to make sure that we were successful. So if you have a team and that team worked really hard to implement a lot of these pieces, we want to make sure that we reward that with communicating success throughout this process. This is a good place to start to talk about collaboration, because any good plan has a leader, but it also has to be implemented, and having the right people in place is key in terms of collaboration. So we are going to go talk about collaboration next. All right. So when we start to talk about collaboration and teams, teams outperform individuals. There are lots of case studies. Individuals are great, but when you start to combine knowledge of teams, we really get to a place where we can do more with a team just based on knowledge alone. In terms of boosting morale or improving the efficiency, having organizations that have teams involved at all levels wind up doing better with their strategic plans. If we take a look at a historical reference of manufacturing during the quality revolution, there were quality circles and manufacturing teams that actually had those teams contributing to what those goals might be, to be able to be involved in the planning aspect of it, in the feedback aspect of it, changed the way manufacturing quality happened 50 years ago. And those things can still be achieved in planning, and it's used in cross-functional teams in many organizations to succeed in terms of the quality of their planning and the execution of those plans. And not only that, but you're starting to foster future leaders. Who do we promote? Who's gonna succeed and be future leaders for the fleet is a great way to get those teams involved and provide a career path for those within your organization. Breaking down silos is going to be the next part of this. So having regular interdepartment meetings, it fosters that open communication that I talked about. Bringing people involved in it allows you to overcome hurdles of change. Anybody who's tried to implement new software, implement new process, has run into resistance to that change. But by bringing in team members, by bringing in resources to the process, it really helps foster that success and that communication. Integrative tools for collaboration. So, we are in a modern world, whether we use Teams, whether we use email for notifications, but all of those things and being able to provide data and being able to get that data into the hands of the people that need it is a very important part of breaking down those silos, including those stakeholders, right? Traditionally, sometimes they have to search for information. With collaborative tools, those communication of reports and key performance indicators and goals can be put right into their hands. And cross-training programs, understanding what those in your team are doing that maybe isn't necessarily your role, but understanding what the parts room has to go through when they have to go out and provide orders for preventive maintenance. Those help be able to foster teams as well and be able to work together. And when asked for their feedback and understanding in the planning, since they have a broader knowledge, as we mentioned before, strategic visions, strategic leaders that have that vision have done a lot of those different roles and work themselves between turning wrenches all the way to visionary leaders. So those cross-training programs help foster that. All right, and then breaking down silos in terms of leadership support and group projects. We are looking at being encouraging as a leader, right? I think that finding rewards programs, we have talked to several keynote speakers who have been at our academy that have talked about the rewards of it and how they have regular rewards, whether it's in terms of performance, whether it's in terms of team participation and team leadership, but getting everyone involved and having fun things to do and being able to work through that provides a reason to succeed for all of those within the team. And group projects, bringing people together, getting that feedback and planning in group projects is really key as well. All right, we are coming down to some of the conclusions here today. But what I'd like to do is we talk about collaboration um, and leveraging that in those teams. Again, as a summary, fleet management software and solutions allow for that collaboration, real-time data, automating routine tasks. We talk about moving from manual to automated tasks, automated assignment based on the data. Those are some things that are strategic in nature for organizations and planning to get to that level. And staying updated on industry technological advancements. So again, participating in some of those shows and getting more than just the leaders to do that. But there may be some folks that are key to operations on the floor. For our academy, we have not only leaders there, but we also have day-to-day folks that want to go and learn more. They come to the academy, and I see them always at the GFX, NAFA, and trade shows as well. It's very important. All right. This is a slide that we started with at the beginning about providing direction, efficiency, and long-term planning. Really what this translates to, and I changed some of the bullet points here so that we could say, hey, you know what, John, those are great statements, but what are some of the things that we talked about that are really actionable? And one of those things is for decision, providing direction is having the right tools to manage the fleet, not only fleet management software, but extensions of that into other technologies that are needed, whether that's fuel management, GPS, predictive analytics. Having those right tools to be able to meet your plan and providing direction is key. How to create those key performance indicators and creating goals and setting goals on those key performance indicators. So I may get key performance indicators from leadership and stakeholders, but then I'm going to set goals of individual team members to be able to support that. That'll roll up. So we want to be able to provide appropriate direction, directly supporting what we need to for stakeholders. Efficiencies, increased availability is some of the goals that come through. So we want to be able to create that. We want to be able to do more with less. Is there a way to run operations and automate with maybe a difficulty in hiring techs? And the answer is yes. With technology and predictive analytics, there very well maybe need the ability to go ahead and do that. Then reduced waste. Do we have parts that aren't needed? Are we ordering parts and creating inventory that's not needed today? I've seen organizations that used to have very large parts rooms, and they have gone through a large effort to clear out old parts, create more space, and order more in a just-in-time manner by having the data necessary to do that. And our long-term planning, strategic thinking, using the data to make better business decisions, and the validation of the goals and directions. And one of the final slides I'm going to talk to today is in terms of what we would call a fleet maturity. But the goals of a strategic, mature fleet would be to transform informal processes into formal processes. When organizations may have lots of informal processes saying, oh, I need to go to Bob or Jim, he's got those parts and he knows how to get this done. That's great. That's a process. It's an informal one. But we want to be able to formalize that and automate that. So we want to go from a manual to automated processes so we can capture data. We want to go from disparate systems and swivel chairs and different solutions. We want to be able to consolidate data. So when we consolidate data, we can report on it. We want to be less reactive and more proactive in our plan. So our operations, instead of being reactive and saying, oh, you know, we've hit a certain mileage amount, so we're going to go ahead and bring that vehicle in and notify them. We can understand what needs to be done maybe from a preventive maintenance standpoint well before it needs to be done and plan for it. Make sure the parts are there. Make sure that it's scheduled appropriately. Make sure that the end users know when to bring it in. Those are proactive parts of a plan. And tactical to strategic. We want to think overall for the organization, the city, we want to align with their goals, mandates. EV programs are driven a lot on mandates from the administration, and those are aligning with strategic goals of the organization. So those are all different parts of the plan, and those are all parts of a mature fleet that are run by fleet decision makers and have great outcomes through that. So with that, we are just about We are just about to the end of our presentation today, and we may want to open it up for some questions. So I'd like to just thank everybody for joining, and we're happy to take some questions and get through that.
Okay, so John, thank you again. We'll kick it off with this first one, and it is, what should I consider before adding EVs to my fleet?
That's a great question. So as I mentioned, I did use that as an example. We've worked with a lot of organizations, and here's what I see from our customers that are planning that. One, is the infrastructure capable of supporting it? Two, how are they going to be used? So are they going to be used for major operations, heavy duty, light duty? Where are the chargers going to be placed, right? At what times are they going to be charged? Do we need light duty chargers, maybe charging overnight slowly? Or is this something that's going to be in continual use that we need DC fast chargers? So there are a lot of different components in terms of that EV process that need to be considered. And we've worked with a lot of organizations to help through that large planning process. So thank you. That's a great question.
The next question is, how can I use predictive analytics to improve my fleet's performance?
Yeah, that again, a great question. So predictive analytics is, and it sometimes is also these days being marketed as AI, but it's really taking the data and running algorithms to that to make decisions for the fleet, maintenance decisions. So if I'm getting data in that says, hey, this battery, these are the indicators that happen generally before a battery fails. I can be proactive. Remember, we talked a little bit about strategic value of going from tactical to strategic. Well, this is a way that I can not be tactical and reactive, but I can be strategic, plan to go ahead and replace that based on the data coming in. It could help with preventive maintenance. So when we start to take a look at preventive maintenance and how we trigger preventive maintenance today, are we taking a look at the data that's coming from the vehicle saying that it's time for preventive maintenance, or are we looking at mileage or hours and going through the preventive maintenance regardless of what some of the data says? So it's really taking this consolidated data that we've talked about and now starting to manage the fleet based on that data rather than traditional methods of preventive maintenance. And could that save potentially in terms of resources, parts? Absolutely. And we see fleets starting to take a look at that and going down that path. And AssetWorks does have a program. We work with several partners to be able to help take that data and start to work with our preventive maintenance and managing those fleets that way.
Gotcha. We have another one, and it asks, what are your top 3 KPIs for measuring your fleet success?
I think that when we've got some reporting for KPIs, and generally we work with more than 3, but it's generally KPIs around age and cost of the fleet that is used to generate replacement modeling, right? So do we repair or replace? So we're taking a look at things like age, breakdown, spend, labor. All of those things go into the repair replace modeling, which if we can do that far enough in advance with some of the algorithms that we have, we can go ahead now use that to either create budgets for replacements, new purchases of vehicles, and justify those budgets when that happens. And then it also allows us to validate the planning on the back end in terms of how many resources are we going to need, what kind of parts, and what vehicles are performing the best. So a lot of those key performance indicators, age, labor, cost to operate that vehicle, those are all components of those repair replace modeling.
Got it. And we have time for one more question. And this is, how can I use data analytics to manage my fleet transformation?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
How can I use data analytics to manage my fleet transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. So the data analytics, when we start to talk about this plan and implementing the tools, right, it's collecting that data. So the data is going to drive the key performance indicators that we just talked about. It may drive the analytics in terms of how you do preventive maintenance or proactive maintenance, but it's the data can't be overstated that how important all of the data is, and consolidating that data and having it in one place. It works for everything from managing the fleet to validating stakeholders and budgets. The data is really just key in collecting as much as possible, and then slicing and dicing that into the appropriate reporting is really key. So thank you.
Got it. Okay, well, that does wrap up our session. So I just wanted to say, for anyone who did ask a question that wasn't answered, again, we will be following up via email to answer your questions individually. We hope that you all enjoyed today's webinar. Again, I want to thank John Compton and AssetWorks for today's presentation. We had a few of you ask about the slides, so I do want to mention that this webinar will be available on demand on the Government Fleet website at governmentfleet.com/webinars. So you can look there to find it. Thank you all again. Have a great day, and we'll see you guys soon.
Thank you, everyone.